For nearly 4 decades, the world functioned on one dominant belief. Globalization was the ultimate solution to conflict and poverty. The idea was simple and persuasive. If nations became deeply connected through trade, war would become economically irrational. If the United States depended on China for affordable goods and China depended on the United States for capital and financial stability, then both sides would be locked into peace by necessity. Economic entanglement was supposed to replace military confrontation. Out of this belief, an incredibly complex global system was constructed. Supply chains stretched across continents with remarkable efficiency. A smartphone designed in California could be assembled in Shenzhen, powered by chips from Taiwan, minerals from Africa, and machinery from Europe. Capital flowed freely across borders, chasing efficiency rather than loyalty. From money and trade, borders became almost invisible, even though for people they remained firmly in place. By the mid-2020s, that world began to collapse, not gradually, but deliberately. What we are witnessing is the rise of economic balkanization. The once unified global economy is breaking apart into two hostile and increasingly incompatible spheres. On one side stands the Western Bloc, led by the United States, supported by the G7, NATO, and key Pacific allies. On the other side is a Eurasian bloc anchored by China and Russia, joined by Iran and an expanding network across the global south. This shift is not a passing trade dispute or a temporary tariff war. It is a structural separation. Humanity is dividing into two competing systems for trade, technology, finance, and information. The catalyst for this rupture was a harsh realization. Interdependence, once praised as a safeguard against war, had quietly become a strategic vulnerability. The pandemic and the war in Ukraine forced Western governments to confront an uncomfortable truth. They had outsourced critical parts of their survival to geopolitical rivals. Europe discovered that its energy security depended heavily on Russian gas. The United States realized that much of its industrial capacity and medical supply chain relied on China. What had once been celebrated as efficiency was now seen as dangerous dependence. In response, the language of globalization changed. Free trade was replaced by terms like de-risking and friendshoring. These words sound technical and harmless, but their meaning is blunt. If a country is not a political ally, it is no longer considered a reliable supplier. Trust is no longer based on price or quality, but on geopolitical alignment. A new kind of iron curtain is now taking shape. Unlike the Cold War barrier made of concrete and barbed wire, this one is built from export controls, sanctions, entity lists, and incompatible software systems. Its most visible battlefield is the digital world. For decades, the Internet was imagined as a single global network connecting all of humanity. That vision is rapidly disappearing. In its place, a split digital reality is emerging. In the Western sphere, the Internet is dominated by American technology giants, regulated by European privacy rules, and increasingly monitored by Western intelligence agencies. In the Eastern sphere, the Internet is sovereign and enclosed, protected by firewalls and built around domestic platforms, payment systems, and navigation networks. This divide is not just about censorship or online speech, it is about the physical infrastructure of the modern age. The United States has actively removed Chinese hardware from its communication networks and pressured allies to follow the same path. The result is a future where devices purchased in different parts of the world may no longer communicate seamlessly, not because of politics on the surface, but because of fundamentally different technological standards underneath. This fragmentation is forcing multinational corporations into an impossible dilemma. For decades, the dominant strategy was known as China Plus One. Companies kept massive production bases in China while opening smaller facilities elsewhere as insurance. That strategy is no longer viable. Businesses are no longer hedging risk, they are choosing sides. Apple's shift towards India is not primarily about saving money, it is about survival. being too deeply tied to China has become a geopolitical liability capable of threatening a company's entire valuation. At the same time, Western firms operating inside China are being systematically pushed out. Chinese authorities are instructing state-owned enterprises to replace foreign software and hardware with domestic alternatives, effectively purging Western technology from critical systems. The age of the politically neutral global corporation is coming to an end. Companies will increasingly belong to a bloc. They will be regulated by it, taxed by it, and protected by it. Economic identity is becoming inseparable from geopolitical identity. The world's financial system is undergoing the same fracture. The freezing of Russia's central bank reserves in 2022 sent a powerful shock through the non-Western world. It exposed a reality that many had ignored. The US dollar is not a neutral reserve currency. It is a political instrument backed by American power. If the savings of a major G20 nation can be seized overnight, then no country can consider its reserves truly safe. This realization has accelerated the push towards de-dollarization, not because alternative currencies are stronger or more trustworthy, but because reliance on the dollar now carries serious political risk. A parallel financial system is slowly emerging. Energy trades are conducted in local currencies, barter deals replace cash transactions, payments are routed outside Western-controlled networks. These systems are slower and less efficient, but they offer something increasingly valuable: independence from sanctions and external control. This split has also created a new group of geopolitical players. Countries such as India, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Brazil are refusing to fully commit to either side. They profit by trading with both blocs, buying discounted resources from sanctioned states while maintaining access to Western markets and technology. For now, neutrality is lucrative. However, the room for neutrality is shrinking. Secondary sanctions are expanding and pressure is increasing. The message from both Washington and Beijing is becoming unmistakable. Eventually, every country will be forced to choose. The true tragedy of this economic fragmentation is that it makes global cooperation nearly impossible. Problems like climate change, pandemics, and artificial intelligence risks do not respect borders. They require coordination between rivals. Yet, cooperation is becoming politically unacceptable. Trade disputes undermine climate goals, scientific collaboration collapses under suspicion. In the pursuit of short-term security, humanity is sacrificing long-term stability. The global village is being dismantled and replaced with fortified economic camps. The efficiency that once lifted billions out of poverty is being exchanged for resilience, and resilience comes at a high price. The next phase of this economic separation is no longer confined to trade agreements and diplomatic language. It has become physical, industrial, and deeply strategic. The battlefield has shifted from tariff schedules to semiconductor factories, mineral supply chains, and energy infrastructure. The weapon of choice is no longer the import tax, it is the export control. What is unfolding is a calculated strategy of denial designed to slow, restrict, or permanently cripple the technological progress of rival states. The turning point arrived in October 2022 when the United States unleashed a sweeping set of controls on advanced technology exports to China. These measures were not symbolic, they were devastatingly precise. The sale of high-end artificial intelligence chips, the kind required to train advanced models and power next-generation weapon systems, was abruptly banned. But the restrictions went further. Washington invoked an obscure legal mechanism that dramatically expanded its reach across global supply chains. This rule declared that any product made using American technology, even a single piece of software or patented process, fell under U.S. jurisdiction, regardless of where it was manufactured. The implications were enormous. A company based in Europe or Asia could suddenly find itself legally prohibited from selling equipment to China simply because an American component existed somewhere deep within its production process. The global supply chain, once thought to be politically neutral, was revealed to be firmly under U.S. influence. The most striking example of this power involved the Dutch firm ASML, the sole manufacturer of extreme ultraviolet lithography machines. These machines are essential for producing the most advanced semiconductors on Earth. Despite being a European company, ASML was barred from selling its most advanced equipment to China. With a single regulatory decision, Washington effectively shut off China's access to the cutting edge of chip manufacturing. The objective was clear. The goal was to freeze China's semiconductor industry at an earlier technological level, preventing it from achieving the computing power necessary for advanced artificial intelligence, high-precision weapons, and autonomous systems. This approach, often described as building a small yard with a high fence, divided the technological world into two distinct stacks. One side retained access to state-of-the-art computing, the other was forced to rely on older, less efficient, or smuggled hardware. This division is not limited to China alone. The Global South is increasingly being offered second-tier technology, while top-tier systems are hoarded within the Western Bloc. A new form of technological hierarchy is emerging, where access to innovation is determined by political alignment rather than market demand. Efficiency is no longer the priority, control is. China, however, did not respond by trying to match the West chip for chip. Instead, it identified a different pressure point. While the West dominates software and advanced processors, China controls much of the physical chemistry that makes modern technology possible. Decades of environmental offshoring left the West dependent on Chinese refining capacity for critical materials. China processes the majority of the world's lithium, cobalt, and rare earth elements. These materials are not merely mined, they require complex, energy-intensive, and environmentally damaging refining processes. The West moved these operations abroad long ago to keep its own landscapes clean. China accepted the pollution and built the infrastructure. That decision has now become a strategic advantage. Beginning in 2023 and accelerating through 2024, China introduced its own export controls. At first, the targets seemed obscure. Gallium and germanium are not household names, but they are essential for radar systems, fiber optics, and advanced semiconductors. Prices spiked almost overnight. Then came restrictions on graphite, a critical component of electric vehicle batteries. Later followed antimony, a material used in ammunition, armor, and night vision equipment. The message was unmistakable. If access to advanced chips could be restricted, then access to the raw materials required to build weapons, energy systems, and infrastructure could also be weaponized. Modern militaries cannot function without these inputs. A single advanced fighter jet contains hundreds of kilograms of rare earth materials. Without them, assembly lines do not slow down, they stop. This reality exposed a dangerous contradiction. Western nations have committed themselves to rapid green transitions. Internal combustion engines are being phased out, solar grids and battery storage systems are being expanded, yet the supply chains that make this transition possible are overwhelmingly controlled by China. Solar panel manufacturing, battery chemistry, and processing capacity are heavily concentrated in Chinese firms. By attempting to isolate China for security reasons, the West has undermined its own climate goals. The contradiction is particularly visible in the automotive sector. Western manufacturers desperately need access to affordable battery technology to make electric vehicles competitive, yet internal policy increasingly restricts the use of components linked to Chinese firms. The result is higher prices, slower adoption, and political backlash. This tension marks the beginning of what economists describe as the inefficiency boom. For decades, production was optimized for cost. Now it is optimized for security. Governments are pouring massive sums into rebuilding domestic manufacturing capacity. Semiconductor factories are rising in deserts and industrial parks. Battery plants are being constructed far from traditional supply hubs. These investments create jobs and political wins at home, but they come with an enormous hidden cost. The world is duplicating its industrial base. Entire supply chains are being rebuilt not because they are better, but because they are politically safer.
Economies of scale are lost, specialization is abandoned. The result is persistent structural inflation. Cheap consumer goods are becoming relics of the past. When manufacturing is relocated to high-wage countries and efficient suppliers are excluded, prices rise across the board. Monetary policy cannot fix this. Interest rates cannot reverse the fact that the deflationary engine of global manufacturing has been intentionally dismantled. At the same time, the world is entering a new standards war. In the past, shared technical standards allowed global trade to function smoothly. Today, those standards are diverging. China is developing and exporting its own systems for telecommunications, energy storage, transportation, and digital infrastructure. Projects built under its influence are designed to operate within its ecosystem, not the Western one. For countries in the middle, this creates a painful choice. Infrastructure decisions made today will lock in alliances for decades. Choosing one system often means excluding the other. Neutrality becomes technically difficult, not just politically risky. As economic ties weaken, the incentives that once discouraged military conflict also erode. Trade acted as a stabilizing force. When nations were deeply connected, war carried enormous economic costs. As those connections are severed, the cost of confrontation declines. Factories are relocated not only for efficiency, but for survivability. Economic separation is quietly laying the groundwork for physical conflict. The logic of peace, built on mutual dependence, is being replaced by the logic of preparedness. When economic interdependence disappears, the barriers to war fall with it.
The final and most dangerous front of this global fracture is the financial system itself. For nearly 70 years, the world ran on a single monetary bloodstream, the United States dollar. It was trusted not because nations admired American politics, but because the dollar was seen as neutral, stable, and immune from political manipulation. That belief collapsed in early 2022 when Western nations froze hundreds of billions of dollars belonging to Russia's central bank. In that moment, the global financial order crossed a point of no return. For the first time, the world's reserve currency was openly weaponized at a sovereign level. The signal sent to the rest of the world was chillingly clear. Money held in dollars is only safe if your foreign policy aligns with Washington. If the reserves of a nuclear-armed G20 nation could be seized overnight, then no country could assume its savings were beyond reach. Trust, once broken, does not return easily. This realization triggered a silent but accelerating exit. Central banks across the global south began searching for alternatives, not because they believed another currency was superior, but because dependence had become dangerous. One of the clearest signs of this shift has been the renewed importance of gold. Central banks are accumulating gold at the fastest pace in decades. Unlike digital money, gold carries no counterparty risk. It is not someone else's liability. It cannot be frozen with a keystroke or erased by sanctions. Alongside this move has come the fragmentation of payment systems. Western economies continue to rely on networks that revolve around the dollar, while alternative systems are quietly expanding. These platforms are less efficient, slower, and far more cumbersome, but they offer insulation from political pressure. For states prioritizing regime survival over efficiency, that trade-off is acceptable. The long-term ambition of the emerging bloc is not necessarily to replace the dollar with another national currency. There is little trust in alternatives. Instead, the goal is to build a system that allows trade to occur without touching the Western financial architecture at all. Commodity-backed arrangements, local currency swaps, and synthetic trading units are all being explored. Each step taken in this direction reduces the leverage once held by dollar-based sanctions. As this parallel system grows, the privilege long enjoyed by the United States begins to erode. For decades, it could fund massive deficits by issuing the currency the world needed. If demand for that currency declines, deficits must be financed through real savings rather than monetary expansion. The geopolitical consequences of that shift would be profound. Yet, the most unsettling consequence of financial balkanization is not international. it is domestic. As global capital flows fracture, governments become increasingly fearful of capital flight. Wealth becomes harder to control, and control becomes a priority. States begin to view private capital not as personal property, but as a national resource that must be managed, directed, and, if necessary, restrained. This shift is already visible. Capital controls are returning in various forms. Some countries restrict foreign transfers. Others monitor crypto markets aggressively. Even nations that once prided themselves on open financial systems are expanding surveillance under the banner of financial security and anti-money laundering enforcement. The walls are not only rising between nations, they are rising within them. In a fractured world, governments need funding for industrial policy, military expansion, and social stability. When external financing becomes unreliable, they turn inward. This leads to a process economists describe as financial repression. Interest rates on savings are kept below inflation. Pension funds and insurance companies are pressured to hold government debt. Over time, citizens lose purchasing power without any explicit confiscation taking place. But history shows that when pressure intensifies, subtle methods give way to blunt ones. Modern wealth is overwhelmingly digital. It exists as numbers in databases owned by banks and regulated by the state. If authorities decide to change the rules governing those databases, access can be restricted instantly. This is not a dystopian fantasy. It is a recurring historical pattern. One of the most famous examples occurred during the Great Depression. Faced with economic collapse and widespread distrust in the banking system, the U.S. government did not attempt to restore confidence through persuasion. Instead, it criminalized independent action. Citizens were ordered to surrender their gold holdings in exchange for paper currency at a fixed rate. Shortly afterward, the value of that currency was deliberately reduced, transferring wealth from the public to the state. The mechanism has evolved, but the principle remains the same. After the financial crisis of 2008, new legal frameworks were introduced across advanced economies. These rules allow banks to protect themselves during failure by converting depositor funds into equity. In effect, savings above insured limits can be legally seized to stabilize financial institutions. This has already happened in real-world cases. It is not hypothetical. In such a system, bank deposits are not truly owned by depositors. They are unsecured loans to the bank. During periods of stability, this distinction is irrelevant. During crises, it becomes decisive. In an era of economic fragmentation, financial systems are more vulnerable, not less. External shocks, sanctions, and disrupted trade increase the likelihood of stress events. As the global economy divides into rival camps, efficiency gives way to control. States seek command over supply chains, information flows, and capital movement. Security becomes the overriding objective. But security for the state often means diminished sovereignty for the individual. The Iron Curtain being constructed is not limited to borders on a map. It is tightening around financial freedom itself. Choices that once belonged to individuals are increasingly shaped by national strategy. Economic balkanization is not only separating East from West, it is separating people from control over their own wealth. The trajectory is clear. A world built on open markets and trust is being replaced by one defined by suspicion and resilience. The cost of that transformation will not only be measured in higher prices and slower innovation, it will be measured in lost autonomy. As the global system fractures, the space for individual economic independence shrinks. The wall is not only between nations, it is forming around every account, every asset, and every citizen.